Emily, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today. We are so close to the Women Who Build Summit, and I'm really looking forward to this panel that you're going to be on. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's heeding the warning signs, strategies for identifying and managing troubled projects. And we've got such a great panel with you and Colleen and Sarah. And I think everybody's going to learn something really cool from this. So could you just start out, tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got here, and then let's get into what people can look forward to during the summit.
Absolutely. And thank you, Laura, for inviting me and for inviting us to speak at the conference in a couple of weeks. My name is Emily Federico. I am an industrial engineer by degree from Lehigh University. I have been in the industry for 21 years now. I have always worked for the same firm or legacy firm, which is currently now Ankara. I work in our construction disputes and advisory group. And what I focus on is construction disputes, so large-scale commercial disputes in all different types of construction, working for owners and for contractors and architects, et cetera, throughout the construction industry, providing them with expertise, whether or not that's in a dispute, or if they are starting off the project and trying to stay away from disputes. So trying to help them to manage their project controls, helping them to keep their project on track, understanding where they are from a budget and from a timing standpoint. And it's been a really great experience to work with all of my clients. They're all so different. Every project is so different. A lot of them, though, I see a lot of the same problems over and over again. And it's sometimes surprising that people aren't aware that these things come up or how to identify them. So I'm hoping that this presentation can kind of give people some things to look out for.
Well, it's a really exciting topic, and one I think we don't spend enough time early enough in people's careers really helping them build acumen. And this is an acumen issue, really, because if acumen is the ability to kind of see the dots that are out there and understand that you develop a sniffer, like this is a danger, maybe not so much today, could be tomorrow, what do I need to do now? And then being able to respond to changes so that you can pull those different dots. I think acumen is something that we'd like to think can only come from experience, but really I think it comes from exposure and awareness and conversation. So this is such a great topic for everyone that's going to be there. So tell me, what are you most excited to share? And I have a bias on this. I think so I'm going to share my bias. My bias is that the people who are higher up in an organization, they've heard more war stories. They've been involved in more contract negotiations. They have kind of been exposed a little bit more. So they have built some acumen, and they're able to respond a little bit better. But it's the less tenured people that I really, if it was my mission, it would be to get those less tenured people more exposed. Like, you don't know what you don't know. So from your perspective, what is it that people can start now, or like early in their careers, paying attention to help avoid these risks with litigation and arbitration and mediation and things like that?
Certainly. So one of the great things about this particular conference, the Women That Build conference, is that it is an invitation to people throughout their careers in construction. So it might be somebody that just started off with a junior field engineer that is just coming out of college, that isn't aware of the things to expect on a construction project, really throughout the life cycle of that project. It's interesting that you're saying the focus is, your thoughts are focusing on some of the people younger in their career. I'm always surprised when I find people that have been working in construction for 40 years that still don't think about, oh, well, this is what the contract tells me to do. And so they're not really thinking about the contract. But for people that are more junior in their career and are really just starting out here, they're not aware of what to look for. So I think about projects that go poorly, and it starts off with communication. And when you're thinking about, or poor communication, I'll say. So when you're thinking about some of the more junior people on a construction project, they're really just following what they're seeing other people doing that have been in the industry for a long period of time. So you want to make sure that those people are also educated and some of the risks and some of the red flags to look out for. But understanding what the contract says and what the responsibilities are of everybody on a project, including the junior people, when they see something that is a potential issue or a potential risk, where to take that. So I think that if somebody younger in their career identifies some issue that they think could be a problem, they're not really sure what to do with it. And so I think getting internally within a construction team or within an entire project, getting in that processes and controls set up early on helps everyone on the team to understand where to go. So as a more junior person, not to be afraid if you see, oh, I think that this schedule activity is pushing, and I'm a little concerned that this is going to cause all these other things to push, but I don't want to tell anybody because I don't know what the risk is going to be. Communicating and telling people up front, I think, is one of the most important things. So kind of setting forward for them where to go, how to document things is so important, both during the project and then, unfortunately, if you do end up in a dispute, for somebody like myself to look back and say, well, where did this go wrong? And trying to figure out the story there.
So I think sometimes people don't read the contract in real life, despite being told by everyone in the organization, read the contract. Here, this is the project you're on. Here's the contract, read it. Oh, and by the way, read some specs too. That's also a good idea. Yeah. Just saying. But I think that the contract in particular is kind of scary to read sometimes because there are some terms in there that it's like you need to have a dictionary on one side and the contract on the other. And know what those mean. So in your experience, what are a few words that if people knew what those words meant from a legal perspective, they might actually not be so afraid of reading the contract? Like then it wouldn't be all garbly-gook.
One of the biggest words I'll say in terms of the contract terms is notice. So what I find a lot of times is that individual project teams don't really understand what constitutes notice in their contract and when to provide it. I always talk about notice as kind of an opportunity to give everyone on the team, whether or not that's the contractor, the subcontractors, the owner, the architect, giving them the opportunity to make decisions. So providing notice for me doesn't have to be a disagreement, and it doesn't have to be a contractor coming to an owner and saying, oh, this is definitely going to be a problem. It's more of, hey, I think this could be an issue. You've just issued this change order. Let's talk about it. It gives the owner an opportunity to decide, do they want to proceed with that change? How quickly do they need to proceed with that change? So it's allowing them the opportunity to make a decision. So for me, one of the thing I see that people least follow and are not sure what to say about is notice in the contract. Another thing that we see a lot is on delay. So whether or not delay is excusable, and every contract says something different about whether or not delay is excusable. So understanding what the contract says there in terms of excusable delay. What else do I see? I don't know, those are the big ones. We're going to talk about a few in the presentation.
Well, I'll say that some of the words that have confused me is like the word indemnification.
Oh, yeah.
I've looked that word up. I was telling Sarah this too. I've looked that word up 100 times, and every time I need to read that word, I have to look it up again. Because for some reason, I don't know if it's the spelling or the way the word looks when it's all put together. It's always like, the hell does that mean? So that's one that I'm like,
what does this mean?
I know. And I swear, I think most people don't know what that really means. And they toss it around in conversation to sound smart. Well, I don't know. Who's indemnified? Like, I don't know.
That's more of a Sarah term than I deal with.
Well, and that's a pretty detailed term. So we don't want to get too into those details. But the the thing I think that people need to be looking at are liquidated damages,
yes,
and consequential damages, and understanding the difference between the two.
Yes.
That's one I've seen people trip on.
So liquidated damage is interesting. I have one of my colleagues, every time I talk about liquidated damages, he says, Emily, you need to do a presentation to the industry about liquidated damages and when they're a penalty and when they're not. Because liquidated damages are never supposed to be a penalty, right? It's supposed to be, if for every day that this project is not turned over, I, as the owner, am going to incur these costs. So whether, depends on what type of project is, right? Is it lost revenue? If it's like a school, for instance, do I need to now bus people somewhere else? Do I have to pay for outside facilities? All these things that you think of and you come up with before the contract is written, and it's this amount. It's never supposed to be a penalty. I see a lot of times that depending on the project, especially like industrial projects where you have offtake agreements and all these other things, sometimes it does become a little bit of a penalty. And so, yeah, there's a lot of disagreement about liquidated damages and whether or not they're enforceable at the end of the day.
Interesting. See, this topic is, oh, it's such a great topic. I'm so happy that this panel is in place, and that you have this audience, because the beautiful part about Construction Institute is not only the tenure. It's I love how you phrase that. It's an open invitation to all tenures. That was really eloquent and well put. In addition to that, it's the whole AEC industry. So owners, architects, engineers, CMs, GCs, trades, we're getting more and more like vendors and suppliers coming in too. So like it's CI is just wide and deep, and that's one of its unique things.
Well, if you think about like even vendors and suppliers, especially now in this like very closely pre-COVID time, suppliers have been so impacted and have caused a lot more impact to construction projects than I would say they previously were causing. You have all these suspensions in deliveries, and especially now we're seeing these COVID claims coming in related to supply availability and material availability. So I think they're playing an even bigger role now, especially as it relates to disputes like the ones I get involved in.
You mentioned COVID claims, and this is something I think that we should take some time to talk about, because people have been afraid of afraid / predicting that there were going to be a lot of claims coming in as a result of COVID. And so now for the first time, I'm hearing you say you're starting to see COVID claims cross your desk. So can you unpeel that for us a little bit?
Certainly, and without being able to provide the legal guidance on them, I have seen as an expert COVID claims coming in as they relate to loss of productivity and delay. So when we talk about what we're seeing in a loss of productivity side is, one of the biggest impacts I think was vertical transportation. So if you're working in a high-rise project and you are using the elevators to get from ground floor up to the top every day, you previously could have 20 people in a service elevator. And then at some point that was limited to, let's say, 6 people in a service elevator. So you're losing every time, every morning, and then likely after lunch breaks, and then to come back down at the end of the day, could be up to an hour and a half or 2 hours of someone's time. So I've seen photos from high-rise construction where you have hundreds of workers standing on the ground floor in the morning waiting for these elevators because you can no longer put the amount of people in an elevator that you used to do. So that's to bring up people as well as materials. So that's one of the bigger impacts that I think has been legitimate within the COVID claims. An interesting one that I saw, which I didn't quite agree with, was washing your hands. So I had seen a claim come in from a subcontractor saying that they had lost 45 minutes a day for every person related to certain COVID protocols. One of them was the check-in and the temperature checks in the morning. So that's something that makes sense. But then they had said every time you go to the bathroom, you spend a minute washing your hands. And I laughed when I got it because I said, is this new? We're just washing our hands now. We weren't washing our hands before. So there are some things that seem a little bit much to me. And I'm assuming that those are nothing's coming of those because most construction cases don't even go to litigation. They don't go all the way. A lot of them settle before they go all the way. So there's still not going to probably be a ton of case law, but it's starting to build up. And then as it relates to delay, what we're seeing is either shutdowns for COVID, which depending on what type of contract it is, they weren't allowing shutdowns. So for example, state contracts, government contracts, I think a lot of those were saying, no, keep going. But supplier and vendor procurement has been a problem and was a big problem in 2020, 2021. So anything that was coming from overseas was causing pretty significant delay. So if you had, some fancy Italian stone countertops coming, they weren't going to be coming. I had another matter where certain equipment had to be shipped back to Canada to be fixed. And that took way longer than it ever should have taken. So depending on where the materials were coming from, they're causing some fairly large delays. Whether or not those are compensable is another question, though, that is related to the contract. So whether or not it was considered force majeure might take away any compensability for those delays. So excusable, no liquidated damages, but potentially no compensation either.
And COVID caused force majeure to really be a critical contract term. It used to always be in there, but it wasn't something that really, I don't know, got pulled out of the back pocket very often, like acts of God or whatever. But I recall a lot of conversation about, well, COVID is a force majeure. And then it was like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. So that's another one to get real decent clarity on at the beginning, right? Understand what force majeure means on this job at this time.
And you're absolutely right. And I've seen contracts since COVID or during COVID that now say specifically in the contract, pandemic, because pandemic wasn't previously in a lot of contracts. So it would say, like you said, acts of God, war, terrorism, things like that. My favorite one was a shipping contract, and it said pirates. But anyway,
well, yeah,
depending where you are. But yeah, a lot of them have now added pandemic.
You know what's funny? That pirate one does not surprise me too much, considering how much we order from Italy.
Yeah,
and there are pirates in the Mediterranean.
There are. That's right.
And that's a real problem. That's not like a made up problem.
No, it's not. But I did enjoy reading it in a contract.
That's great. Emily, documentation on construction jobs is so important, and there's now so much variability. Well, there's always been variability actually in the documentation, whether the variability came from being legible and complete, but now we've got variation in the digital universe with all these different databases and who owns the data, who doesn't own the data, how hard is it to get there. And so documentation, while it's kind of gotten a little bit more easy, that's what we like to tell ourselves, that it's more easy. I don't necessarily agree with that now that I've said that, but regardless, that's what we tell ourselves. What is it that in your experience are the top three things that a project team has got to have documented?
Top three things. So I live in the world of documents, given that when it comes to disputes, I'm coming in after the fact. So I wasn't there during the project. I have to build the project, and my understanding of the project, especially if it's going to arbitration or into court, because if it wasn't documented and I don't have anything to base my opinion on, it didn't really happen. And so the first thing that I look at is their project schedules. So almost every contract, I don't ever like to say every, but almost every contract includes specifications for your schedules. Is it supposed to be in P6 electronic scheduling software? Is it supposed to be in any type of CPM scheduling software? So starting out and making sure that the schedules are aligning with what the specifications set forth. A lot of times I find that they don't. And sometimes I find that the schedules aren't reflecting what was actually happening on the project, and therefore I can't use them as the basis for an opinion as to what happened. So number one, schedules, making sure that they align with the contract and making sure that they're accurately reflecting forecasts as of what you know at the time and actual information as to what you know at the time of development. The second source of information that we often rely on in terms of rebuilding the project at the end are daily reports. So is this daily reports that are being maintained by the contractor, by the CM, or is it something that the contractor is pulling together for all the subcontractors? But making sure that those daily reports are accurately reflecting what each trade was doing every day, what the manpower was for each trade, and any issues that are coming up on a daily basis. So if for whatever reason a subcontractor is unable to proceed because they're waiting on an RFI or they're performing RFI work, that's a good way for us to track what was happening on a daily basis. And then to the extent that there is a dispute at the end, using those daily reports to say, these back up my schedules. This is what was happening every day. I had the manpower, I couldn't proceed, or I couldn't bring in the manpower because of X reason. So the daily reports to me are incredibly important. And now a third document that I find to be most important, I'd say making sure that your cost records are maintained to accurately reflect also what was happening. So rather than tracking everyone's cost to the same cost code, I recommend that for every time there's an RFI or a change order or any sort of issue, that the time people are spending working on those impacts and issues are coded in the cost reporting that way. So that's people filling out their timesheets every day or having a foreman fill out a timesheet for his crew and saying, these are the hours that these people spent on these various task codes. Because my guess is that somebody is not spending 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, 60, depending on what type of project it is, on the same thing every day. So making sure that people's time is tracked to the proper cost codes in their cost reporting.
Okay, so that's super fantastic. So thank you. We got our schedule,
We got our
our dailies, and we've
daily,
got our timesheets,
we've got
right?
timesheets.
Which
Yes.
spills into cost. I just wanted to make sure that we're like, hey, do your timesheets correctly,
Yes.
coded to your changes.
Yes.
Right? So like those T&M tickets become really important to make sure that the codes are on them all and they're traceable and all of that stuff.
It helps for on a number of different types of, if you have to put together a T&M change order, well, tracking that T&M time for somebody. If you have to put together a delay claim, how much time are people spending on these impacts or these alleged impacts? If you have a loss productivity claim, rather than just saying, well, I think it's 8 hours of time that somebody lost on this item, you have it right there in front of you and you don't have to pull together some theoretical calculation. You have the information right there.
And bulletizing these three things is, I think, so important because many times the further you get, the deeper you get into the field, the less you understand the why of some of these things. And because when people don't understand the why, then it becomes a waste of time in their mind. And so then the quality goes down and then the actual submissions and all of that, it just goes down. And I think that, bringing it back up to saying, hey, this is why we have to have our schedule. This is why we have to have our dailies. And this is why we have to have accurate timesheets. It's not just a floofy thing that is busy work. It is really critical documentation.
I agree. I could talk about this forever, Laura. One of the things I always say on a construction project is when you look at your scheduling specifications, you do want to understand why, because sometimes they seem incredibly onerous. And so I think it's important for a pre-construction scheduling conference between all of the parties so that everyone can understand that why. So if you're a contractor and you're saying, well, what is the owner going to do with these schedules? I think it's important for the owner to set forth, I'm going to review them every month. I have a schedule of this, looking at them. I'm looking at all these things. And so that way the contractor is not just doing it to check the box. They're doing it because it has a purpose on the project. And they understand that everyone's using this schedule as a tool to make decisions and track progress.
Well, and you said another thing that harkens me back to when I was in the field and running jobs in the field. I was in the field doing pharmaceutical biotech work. Mm-hmm. And everybody on the construction site had to go through the documentation training of each site. And they taught you exactly like, this is how you initial and date something. This is how it needs to be signed. Like, and these were like 4 and 5 hour courses that you you had to do, but and it was every single site too. So, and then
Mhm.
there was a refresher every year also. I mean, pharmaceutical was really, but one of the things that has stayed with me forever was very simple. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done.
Nope. It's absolutely true. I mean, it did happen, but nobody in hindsight knows that it happened, and there's no evidence of it. And that can sometimes become troublesome. I think about when I first started working on projects, I always do like an initial kickoff interview with the project team, so that I can understand what's their take on the issues that happened during the project and what caused all the impacts and what caused the costs to go over. And a lot of times then when I dig into the documents, it's different than what the project people had interpreted at the time. And sometimes that's because it's their story and it's not what the full story is. And sometimes it's just nobody documented these things that they had seen.
Right. Yeah, we could talk forever on this. For sure. One of the things that, I work for two global construction management firms, and in both of those firms, they had a very strict policy of monthly project reports. And
Yeah.
in those reports, it was like the narrative, progress photos, there'd be a summary of open RFIs, there were costs, and it wasn't like granular, but it was, pretty detailed. And there was a war story about how one of them was up for like massive lawsuits and everything, and the owner was really, really on them. And the CM firm said, well, wait a minute, let's go back to these monthly reports that we've given you every single month. And the story is that the suit was removed like immediately because there was no grounds to say that the owner wasn't notified, because they had volumes of these monthly reports that were transmitted. I don't even know that they really had to open them because the owner was saying, you never notified me of anything. And it's like, well,
What about this? What about
yes,
this? Yeah,
yes.
it's
Well,
true. And that's really the basis of so much of when, you're sitting I was in a hearing all week last week, and it was so much of that saying, well, what about this monthly report? What about this thing that you said in this weekly, et cetera, because those things are all going to come up. And if it's not there, it's tough to bring something up.
yeah. Oh man. Well, Emily, this is going to be so interesting. And I think that when you, Colleen, and Sarah are done and people walk out of there, their minds are going to be spinning.
I hope so.
Because yeah. I mean, I think being able to navigate these waters is the sign of a true experienced, savvy construction professional. And I don't care if you're on the owner side, the AE side, the GC side, the CM side, or the trade side. This is what separates the tiers in an AEC organization, is being able to understand, respond, and mitigate these kinds of risks, and be a leader to bring the rest of the people on the team into that kind of thinking. So this is really great.
Yes, it is. I'm looking forward to it. And, I obviously hope to meet people, and I'm happy to always talk to anybody that wants to talk about identifying risks and what to do with them. So